for your time. Really appreciate y'all taking the time out of your day to join us today. As Gary just noted, my name is Matthew Shell with Capsum, and I've spent the last several years working with organizations to design and scale learning and development programs using custom simulations. And I've had the privilege of partnering with companies of all sizes, whether they're Fortune 100s here in the States, Global 2000s, or much smaller organizations and small consulting firms, and really just helping them leverage simulations to develop talent in a way that's hands-on, relevant, and measurable. All things we'll hit on today. But really, today's session, the Agile Advantage, it's all about sharing what we've learned over the years, both from our own experience and from the organizations that we worked with. And the goal here really is quite simple. We want to explore why more companies are moving towards custom experiential learning and how they're doing it in a way that's practical, scalable, and that can actually be tied to real business impact. So rather than just running through slides, I did really want to make this as conversational as possible because, we at Capsum have learned so much over 40 years from L&D professionals such as yourselves that, we thought what better way to hold this type of session than to simply do the same thing in return, simply share our perspective. So, throughout this session, feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat. We'll certainly leave some time at the end for a Q&A. And, whether simulations are already on your radar, whether the simulation types that we cover today are a good fit for you or not, or you're just curious about what other companies are doing with custom simulations, I do hope that you walk away from this, with some things that you can apply to your own L&D initiatives. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. And before we dive into the how, let's just take a quick step back and look at the broader picture, right? Because if we wind the clocks back just a decade from now, simulations were seen as cutting edge, but largely inaccessible, right? They were reserved for companies with big budgets and very mature L&D teams. But if you fast forward to today, that landscape has completely changed. I mean, nearly every organization that I speak with isn't just considering simulations. They're actively looking for ways to integrate them across multiple areas of L&D. And why? Well, because today's workforce, today's learners expect more than just your passive one-size-fits-all style training. They want something that's hands-on. They want relevant learning experiences that mirror the real-world decision-making that they do on the job. And this shift is exactly why we've seen simulations go from kind of more of a niche tool to really a core component of learning strategy across everything from leadership development, which of course is one of our primary focuses, but to other things like, onboarding new members of an organization as a part of the performance review process, and even as a core component of succession planning as well. And what's interesting about this is it's not just new adopters. I mean, we're talking about companies that have used simulations for years, for decades, that are now doubling down and expanding their use cases and really embedding these custom sims deeper into their L&D ecosystems. Which of course brings us to our first key question is, what makes simulations so effective? And this will probably be a recap for some of you, but we also want to look at, why are the companies expanding their use? And honestly, the answer is quite easy. It's because they work. But we can do a little bit more to break down exactly why they work. Because first things first, as many of you know, people learn best by doing. In a simulation, learners aren't just absorbing information, they're making decisions, they're seeing results, and they're adjusting in real time. And that's just a game changer when it comes to knowledge transfer. But secondly, with custom sims and sims generally, is that engagement skyrockets. I mean, for those of you that have been through a simulation, you know that they're not passive by any means. I mean, you really feel like you're in the driver's seat. You're interacting with a dynamic scenario that, evolves based on your choices. And really, it's the difference between, say, reading about a challenge and actually trying to navigate one. And then finally, it's the best learning often comes from failure, but you want to do it in a safe environment, of course. Because in simulation, mistakes don't cost your business money, but they do create some great aha moments that really stick with learners. And this is why simulations are really being used across the entire L&D spectrum. It's everything from onboarding to technical training to strategic decision-making, which we'll hit on today. They bring learning to life. And if you're thinking, okay, these are pretty straightforward, but what about things like, how do I scale these things? How do I customize them exactly? How do we make these things work right? Well, that's exactly what's going to be the focus today. But before we dive into those challenges that organizations face and what's kind of driving that shift further, I wanted to just quickly share where we at Capsum are coming from on this. Because at this point, we've been in the industry space for 40 years now, 4 decades, and we've been working with organizations in nearly every type of industry, every type of field, to build these experiential learning programs that don't just teach concepts, but actually develop real world skills alongside them. And of course, if you're in business for 40 years here, you learn quite a few things, thankfully. And I would say the first thing that we've learned is that, a one size fits all approach to simulations just really doesn't cut it anymore. The most effective learning experiences are deeply relevant to the learner, which means that customization is no longer a luxury, it's quickly becoming a necessity. And I can speak directly to this as nearly every single one of our longstanding clients are either currently considering or have already moved forward with customization in some way, shape, or form, particularly within the last 2 years. And then, second, I would say is that simulations work best when they follow an agile process. The most successful companies out there don't build this massive, complex simulation up front. They start small. They test it, they refine it, and then they scale what works from there. And then finally, no matter how well designed a simulation is, it's only as effective as the implementation strategy behind it. The companies that get the most impact don't just drop a sim into their training, they're aligning with their business needs, their L&D goals, right? So today, we're really going to try to break down how top companies are designing these, how they're launching them, how they're scaling them in a way that is both agile and effective. And so if organizations are investing more in simulations, what are we hearing is driving this shift? Well, to put it simply, business needs are evolving faster than traditional training can keep up. Employees expect training that's, relevant to the real world challenges and scenarios that they actually do on a day-to-day basis. And beyond that, leadership teams, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this, need L&D to adapt as priorities change. And if they're going to invest in training, then you're under more pressure than ever to show clear, measurable return on investment because ROI is not really optional anymore. But here's the challenge. Most off-the-shelf training solutions, including many simulations out there, weren't built for this level of agility. They could be too broad, or maybe they're too static, or they don't reflect the realities of a given business. And that's where the custom simulations come in because they do this great job of bridging the gap between theoretical learning and practical decision making. But specifically on the custom part, they're giving learners hands-on experiences in a way that directly aligns with their organization's challenges. And while custom simulations are a very powerful solution, I say this coming from a sim company, the reality is they're not always easy to implement. And many companies out there, find themselves with some roadblocks when they try to design, when they try to launch and scale them effectively. And we're going to tackle some of those next. And these are probably some roadblocks that you might have even experienced if you've researched simulations in the past. So let's go ahead and take a look. Because here's the challenge when it comes to custom sims. They're not necessarily all created equal. And too often, companies and even some simulation providers out there approach them in ways that just simply don't work anymore. I literally hear these points all the time from folks that reach out to us. They'll say, custom simulation, the process is too slow to make it. And they're right. Some companies spend several months, the better part of a year, or even years to build a custom sim, only to realize that by the time it's ready, the business priorities have already shifted, right? But the second most common thing I hear is the cost is too high. And I've talked with several companies, small and large, that easily invest over 6 figures into a custom sim build that they barely use. It's either because it wasn't designed with the learner in mind at the beginning or because it was implemented poorly. And even if you get past those first two objections, then they come across as, well, are they too rigid? How do I scale this? Because again, a custom simulation is only as valuable if it evolves with your company's needs. If it's too rigid, quickly becomes outdated, and then it leaves a lot of companies with a really expensive custom sim that took so long to develop that no longer fits what they need. And let's contextualize that a bit further. Imagine spending 6 months and 6 figures on a custom simulation for a training program that employees only use once. Well, that's exactly what can happen, if companies take the wrong approach. So How exactly do you avoid these pitfalls, and how do you create and implement custom sims that actually work? Well, that's exactly what you can expect from today's session. And again, whether CAPSIM simulations are a fit for you or not, these are general just principles to live by. And we're going to focus on four key areas of principles that really determine whether a custom sim is truly effective and scalable. And first, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to launch these simulations quickly. Because again, too often it takes months or even years on development. So we're going to show you how top companies get from concept to execution in weeks, not months. And then second, we're going to talk about how to measure effectiveness of those simulations. Because many companies fall into this trap of relying on things like, say, vanity metrics, engagement or completion or post-training surveys, without actually tracking real performance improvements. So we'll show you how to measure what matters. And then third, we'll tell you how to keep these sim-based trainings relevant, right? Because business needs change constantly, and training has to evolve with them. So we'll discuss how some of the organizations that we partner with keep these custom sims aligned through a continuous refinement and agile process. And then finally, we'll talk about how to scale that success. A great custom simulation shouldn't be a one-off experience. It should be able to be integrated across an organization for different teams, different regions, different business functions, as long as it's effective. And we'll break down how we can make that happen. And of course, we're going to share how Capsim has approached this and what our sims look like. But really, what we want to tie this to is real world success stories from companies that have actually tackled these challenges head on. So we're not just going to talk about best practices, we certainly will. But let's look at the following companies and see how they actually made this work. Because over the years, we've worked with so many different phenomenal companies. I mean, in this particular session, we're going to hit on Diageo, Cummins, the American Association for Physician Leadership, or AAPL for short, Samsung, Eli Lilly, and Merck, and how we help them to build and scale simulations that solve real L&D challenges. And you can see there's quite a difference in the type of fields and applications here, right? Industries. But each of these organizations face the same struggles we just talked about. But rather than getting stuck in some long development cycle or building something that wouldn't adapt over time, they took a different approach, one that's more about agility and customization and really showing business impact. So we'll break down their challenges, how their solutions worked, and most importantly, what results we saw from that. But before we dive into those stories, let's just take a quick step back, and I want to outline the exact type of simulation-based solutions we are talking about that we at Capsim offer for context on these stories, just so we're all on the same page. And at Capsim, really our core focus for 4 decades now has been really refining and designing two types of simulation-based approaches that organizations can implement either separately or together, depending on their goals. So as we go through these success stories, the first type you're going to hear about is group-based leadership accelerator programs. That these are very highly interactive, kind of more strategy-driven experiences where we actually break people into teams and we're building up business acumen and decision-making skills in a very hands-on and competitive environment. So we'll talk about that. And then secondly, we'll talk about these fully custom simulated skill assessments that we have called Capsim Inbox that can directly mirror real world job scenarios, virtually any job role out there, and really help companies measure and develop the skills that matter most to a given role or to their exact industry, or even a unique competency model that they've implemented that can be assessed. And the best part here is that whether they're used separately or together, all of these are designed with flexibility, scalability, and impact in mind. So we'll expand on what these solutions are and how companies are using them in real world stories in a moment. But for now, let's move to our first of the four key takeaways, which is how to launch a custom simulation in weeks, not months. Because if you are going to invest in a custom simulation for learning and development, you need to be able to launch them quickly. And the reason is you want to see the benefits, you want to see the works for you, and you want to see the potential for the future. And really, the key to making this happen is not reinventing the wheel or building something big at the start. It's about just starting out small and piloting a simulation that has a proven model that can be iterated and improved on over time, rather than building it from scratch and hoping that it works. And of course, what we're really getting at here with this principle is speed, right? Because as we mentioned, one of the core objections out there to traditional custom sims is that they just take too long to develop. And the biggest reason is that a lot of companies out there still approach them like old school software projects. They're again slow, expensive, and rigid, like we mentioned earlier. They'll spend those months or even years designing and testing every small detail, only to realize that it's outdated before it even launches. And by the time the simulation does ultimately roll out, those business needs have shifted, and then employees either don't use it or they don't find it relevant. It's like they, instead of focusing on making a dynamic learning tool, it was kind of became over engineered and kind of got disconnected from reality. And the perfect analogy we could think of for this would be like, think of spending months building the perfect race car. You're fine tuning every last feature, only to step out on the track and the race is already over, right? So really, what's the alternative here? How do you build a custom sim without getting stuck in this cycle? And one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies make when building custom simulations is that over engineering aspect. Spending all this time trying to create a perfect world instead of focusing on creating an effective learning experience first. You can do both. And trust me, I totally get it. It makes sense to want to have a simulation that perfectly mirrors the company that you're operating in. But here's the problem. If you get too close, learners start to poke holes in it. They'll say, that's not exactly how we do it here at this company, or this doesn't match our specific system or process. And then suddenly, instead of being engaged in this learning experience, they're distracted by the kind of smaller details that don't line up absolutely perfectly. So, what I would argue the smarter approach is that focus on relevance over hyper detail realism, at least at the start, because you can always go back and address the realism aspect later, but you need to make sure the model itself works first. So instead of spending months on creating an entire world from scratch, use flexible, more adaptable environments where the scenarios, the decisions, and the scoring can all be customized without having to literally rebuild everything from the ground up, or even creating the framework at the start as well. That way, the simulation feels real enough to be meaningful, but broad enough to be practical and scalable. And to show you exactly how this works, let's take a look at our first success stories with Cummins and Diageo and how they've applied this successfully. And we'll start by highlighting Cummins. They are, of course, the American multinational engine and generator manufacturer based here in Indiana, not too far from where I'm at, actually. And they've been using our simulations in their leadership development programs for the better part of 2 decades now. And to Cummins' credit, way before they ever reach out to us, they already had the foundations of a very strong, very successful succession planning pathway for leaders. But the key thing they were looking for is that they wanted to make teaching strategic decision making much more experiential. But at the same time, they wanted to make sure they had some continuity between some mid-level leadership development programs and some senior level programs, which led them to reaching out to us. But understandably, they did have some initial concerns because these were very well established programs being conducted all around the globe and training hundreds of future leaders a year. So they were rightfully concerned about implementing a simulation that might cause disruption in that well-oiled machine. No pun intended. But they decided to give our leadership accelerator programs a try back in the early 2010s. So rather than jumping straight into this fully custom build, that's what we did was we started with small pilots. We rolled out an initial program in just a few weeks to show them the capabilities. And I'm happy to say that from those early programs that they were so successful that we eventually evolved them into the main strategy session of these two separate leadership development tracks that are now known as their global leadership development program for mid-level managers and their executive development program, which is for senior leaders all the way up to including C-suite. In fact, we just did one in January for them. And later, we're going to talk a bit more about how these programs have developed with customization over time at Cummins. But for now, I'm sure a lot of you are starting to get curious as to what do these simulations actually look like and how do they operate. So we'll go and start with what Cummins has been using for the better part of 20 years now. Well, what they're put their leaders through is one of those leadership accelerator simulations, where we broke them into teams and each team runs their own multi-million-dollar company against each other in a closed marketplace. And they're actually competing directly against their peers' teams. So not only did we have this kind of really fun and competitive format, but the Cummins leaders were able to get this very holistic view of business operations. And at the same time, we were kind of breaking them out of their silos because these are folks from all different business units. were able to sharpen their decision making and really strengthen that collaboration with their peers with people that they wouldn't typically work with. And again, we're doing all this within this safe simulated environment. And whether we're delivering these on site or virtually, we can get these off the ground in 2 or 3 weeks time, literally from concept to kickoff, without any disruption of the flow of this existing multi-month leadership development program. And by using simulations of different complexities for these two different learner levels, the mid to senior level, we're able to focus on a wide variety of topics that are relevant to those specific roles. And really, just to give you an idea, I mean, again, from Cummins' perspective, think about like the importance of something like research and development for them. How does Cummins decide which new products to develop? Or from a marketing perspective, how do they set competitive pricing against the competition? Or particularly in production, what trade-offs do they have to think about when it comes to investing in things like, added capacity, automation, or costs associated with those? And then another common factor, not just with Cummins, but with other clients of ours, is the financial literacy component. Where Cummins leaders need to understand how to raise capital, how to manage cash flows, and interpret financial statements. I mean, the list can go on and on. I could talk about human resources, I could talk about sustainability, international business, you name it. Our simulations can basically hit on it. But of course, it's practically exposing them via simulation to these topics and having them make these smart decisions, which is great, but it's only part of the equation. Because at the same time, you do need data to make sure you measure the impact of those decisions, because that's where the learning truly lies. Which brings us to the final part I want to mention here on Leadership Accelerators, which is that a big part of what makes these simulations so impactful is that there's this real world data that learners get to engage with. I mean, they're looking at their success measures, they're looking at market segments, they're looking at financial statements, just like they will in their own roles, or maybe they're already doing. And the reason this is so important is that if you're training the leaders that are one day going to be making the decisions that will literally make or break your company, then the methods that you're using to train them better be proven. They better be effective, right? But again, we'll leave this here for now, because leadership accelerators like this are just one way you can get simulations launched quickly. And we're going to check in on Cummins a few more times during the session just to kind of show you how things have developed over time. But there is another simulation-based method that can be customized and launched very quickly that I'd like to also discuss. And to do so, I'd like to introduce you to our second success story, which details our work with Diageo, the British multinational beverage company behind some of the most well-known brands out there, like Guinness and Johnnie Walker, for instance. And with Diageo, they came to us with a familiar challenge. They wanted to develop like core business knowledge for their general managers who were, managing entire regions of their business. But they did have some very unique requests in there as well for us, because you see, they didn't want to just launch a brand new leadership program with any simulation. They literally said they wanted something as Diageo-fied as possible. So some highly customized way for their GMs to truly understand the relationship between finance, marketing, commercial, supply, but at a very senior level. And there is one curveball important to mention here is that we would be designing this program with them in tandem. So they were creating the content as we were creating the simulation. And it was only 3 months away. But for that, we said, hey, no problem. But how do we actually make that happen? Let's take a closer look. Because in addition to a 2-day leadership accelerator that was done in London, Diageo also incorporated something new into their program. And that was a fully custom simulation-based leadership skills assessment, or what we call, again, a Capsule Inbox. And what Capsule Inbox does is it puts learners into a simulated workplace environment, literally a day on the job, where they took the role of a fictional GM at a fictionalized version of Diageo, and they had to respond to real world tasks and interact with stakeholders and respond to challenges just like they would in their actual role. And everything in this experience, top to bottom, was based on real world experiences that seasoned GMs had actually gone through. We were literally translating their war stories into the simulation content. And it doesn't get much more real than that. And the nice thing about this one is that it doesn't matter what field you're in, what skills or competencies you're looking to assess, it's very malleable in that regard. And as you can see from this visual, because the experience mirrors the types of communication platforms that we use every day, it automatically feels intuitive and authentic. But to be frank with you all, That's also what allowed us to design, develop this, and deliver it within just a few weeks. And of course, we're going to expand on this more in a moment. But to summarize, that Diageo-fied experience, well, they got it. And not only did they get that, they got data that showed senior leaders firsthand the efficacy, how effective this new program was, demonstrating those outcomes. And we're going to actually take a look at some of those results here in a moment. But this is also a great segue to our next principle, in that it's incredibly important to have effective measurement, which is honestly where we see a lot of training programs fall short. Because if you're not actively measuring impact, how do you know your training is actually working? And that's what we're going to take a look at now. And I know this may seem like common sense, but training alone isn't enough. You do have to measure it. And before we return to Diageo, I just wanted to briefly highlight a big challenge we see in L&D, and that is with vanity metrics. And here you see a slide from LinkedIn that details these, what's most commonly used as far as measuring success. Because too often companies out there will measure what's easy to attain, right? Things like completion rates, participation numbers, training hours. And while those numbers might look good on a report, they don't exactly prove that the learning, is making a big difference. And quite frankly, there's a couple of realities out there that we just need to state, like, the fact that executives don't really care how many people finish the training. They want to know if it actually improved decision making. And if you look at it from the learner perspective, they don't just want to do any training. They want to do something that's worth their time. Because if they don't see real value in it, then engagement drops off. And L&D does have a tendency to focus on vanity metrics instead of what's actually driving business impact. Because without real measurement, it's basically impossible to prove effectiveness or make improvements on existing trainings. And that's what we're seeing the best organizations change. They're changing their approach. Instead of tracking surface level engagement, they're making measurement the foundation of their training programs, proving that impact, justifying the investment, and continuously improving on it from there. So what should we actually be measuring instead? Well, this is how we do it with the top companies we work with. They start with the competencies. Before we even start designing the training, they identify the key behaviors or skills that they actually need to measure. And then from there, they build training that tracks application, not just knowledge or retention, because it's not about what participants know, it's how they use it, how they apply it. And then from there, they use performance-based assessments like a CAPSM inbox. Instead of multiple choice quizzes or a survey, they're actually measuring decision making and problem solving in real world scenarios. And as a result, they create this kind of feedback loop. Continuous improvements are made based on real performance data, not just things like post-training surveys. And now, to see what that looks like in action, now that we've covered this, let's actually revisit Diageo and see how they got this right. Because there's a big question in, how do you create a simulation, a custom sim that truly feels like Diageo while measuring what matters at the same time? And really, it goes back to having a proven model. And here's how we approach it. We start by, working with them to identify key jobs to be done, what skills need to be assessed, and who within Diageo can provide that expertise. And that's subject matter experts. Those are those current and former GM roles. And we'll work with them to map out what we call critical incidents. The real situations that GMs will encounter, from those day-to-day challenges to actual high-stakes decisions. And then from there, we break it down further. What was the challenge at the heart of this? What action was taken? How effective was it? And what were the consequences? Were they positive or negative? And once we build out these scenarios, we go right back to the SMEs for feedback. They help us refine the content, tweak the response options, and help validate our scoring model. And again, doing this all within just a couple weeks' time, and we were able to launch a brand new 60-minute custom simulation, which Diageo first rolled out in fall of 23. They did it again last year, and now we're only improving on it further from here in 2025. And just to peel the onion back one more layer, I kind of want to show you behind the scenes with a more generalized example of an inbox. Because basically what these Diageo general managers did was they simply logged in, they completed this sim-based experience in less than an hour, and boom, they got their results. And it isn't just about assessing their ability and giving them empirical and comparative data, but we also wanted to give them some immediate high-quality feedback. Again, all provided by the subject matter experts that help them not only see where, as a snapshot in time, their skills and knowledge is at, but what are the next steps for improving it from there. But now let's actually get to it. What do those results look like when you implement this? Well, there's a couple different things we're tracking. We're looking at pre and post test simulation performance. So, actually measuring how participants improved over time by having them go through the simulation twice over a given period of time, several months, I would say, or a couple of weeks at least. But also, we're looking at the decision making effectiveness, showing them how effectively did they handle these scenarios and how consistent was that proficiency during the sim. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, and what you see on screen here is being able to identify skill gaps, identifying where individuals are excelling and where additional development is needed from there. That way you can be more targeted about where your resources are going. And the core results here, well, I'm happy to say that with Diageo, they saw a 15 to 20% improvement from pre-test to post-test in their key business decision-making skills among those GMs. That's the kind of measurement that goes beyond engagement metrics. That's what proves impact. And with this data, Diageo was able to validate the investment in the program, refine it further for future programs, and ensure that their leaders were truly prepared for the road that lies ahead because they've actually seen what it looks like. This is the level of real world relevance and measurement that a lot of the organizations that we work with aim for, because training is only as valuable as the impact that it creates. But we're going to go ahead and take a break from Diageo here for now. And I want to mix things up a bit, right? And to do so, I'd like to briefly shift to a different kind of challenge. And it was one that was brought to us by the American Association for Physician Leadership, or AAPL for short. And of course, as the name suggests, they're the premier leadership organization for physicians and healthcare providers. I mean, they do everything from offer education to management training to career development to well over 11,000 members across nearly 50 countries. And they have over half a century of leadership training experience. So it's safe to say they had a very extensive, a very highly effective training portfolio. But they did come to us with a very specific challenge. They already had an assessment certification process, but they wanted to make it more immersive, more engaging, hence a custom simulation. But it did need to be seamlessly integrated into their homegrown LMS, and it needed to feed them the data that they needed. So, how do we approach this? Well, we leveraged something that they actually already had. They had a leadership technical skills framework, kind of like a competency framework, if you will. And what that allowed us to do is hit the ground running. And in fact, it's very common for us to use competency frameworks as a launch pad for these type of projects. So rather than building an entirely new assessment system from scratch, we developed a custom by Capsum series of these four little 15-minute inbox simulations that directly were aligned with that technical skills framework. And what we were able to do is, cover four vastly different domains: strategy, operations, finance, quality, and all of them with their own sub-competencies underneath there. But the entire series here can be completed in less than an hour. So that way the AAPL members didn't feel like it was an overwhelming time commitment. And just like with Diageo, subject matter experts played a key role here. They helped us validate the decisions, the response options, and the overall scoring model with very minimal time on their side. And even though these simulations are still fairly new, they were just launched recently, we're already talking with them about how we can iterate and improve on them, which of course brings us to the third focus of today's session, which is how do you keep custom simulations relevant for long-term impact through a continuous refinement process. And here I could share another one of the big mistakes we see in L&D. It's the set it and forget it model, as we'll call it. It's good for a crock pot, not for training as much. But too often, organizations launch a training program, then leave it untouched for years. But if you're already measuring impact from the start, why not use the data to continuously improve it, right? I mean, as another analogy, think of it like a car. You wouldn't throw away your car just because you forgot an oil change. Training works the same way. It needs regular maintenance and updates to stay effective. And when training companies don't take this approach to training, a lot of problems emerge, and it kind of goes in a cycle. The training becomes outdated, and then learners disengage from it because it's no longer relevant to them. And then as a result, the initial investment's wasted. And instead of refining what works, companies end up spending more money to try to rebuild some new training from scratch. And then L&D, creates that, and then they struggle to keep up from there. And by the time updates are made, the business has already moved on, and the training's outdated again, thus completing the cycle. So the best organizations out there that we worked with avoid this trap by treating training as a living, evolving resource. And that's where this real idea of agile iteration comes in. So, how is this exactly done? Well, when we work with organizations, we start with, of course, tracking that real time learner performance, like we had talked about previously. And then from there, we can identify, what are the current business needs? What are the current training needs out there? So when it is time to update, we know exactly, we can be more surgical about where those improvements are needed. And then we simply refresh the sim content quickly because we have this modular design methodology, and it keeps the trainings aligned without any sort of disruption or need for complete reiteration. And it's really this cyclical approach that ensures that any custom sims we make stay relevant, stay engaging, and stay impactful over time. And now to really demonstrate this, I do want to go ahead and revisit Cummins now, and then also share a new story with Merck that I can detail too. And the reason I want to go back to Cummins is because I really truly feel that their approach represents the embodiment of continuous learning and refinement. And again, when we started working them, it all started with an initial pilot. We used a base simulation to test the effectiveness and gather insights. And when the model worked, that's great, but we weren't going to get complacent. We weren't going to stop there. From there, we did end up refining it for those two different learning levels, ensuring that the mid-level managers in a GLDP and senior executives in an EDP experienced simulations with different complexity that was tailored to them. And then later on, we were able to do even more. We modified the starting scenario. We modified the starting conditions of the sim by adjusting things like macroeconomic factors, adding sustainability elements, and really changing the competitive environment to match Cummins' industry. And then the next update came a little bit from our side. We updated our own simulation platforms. And then we moved Cummins to newer sims that allowed for even more customization. And recently, we've done everything from create even more advanced custom scenarios to really layer in more company-specific dynamics. And finally, and actually quite recently, we just got done developing a fully custom module, which was new departments, new decisions that were all about supply chain resilience and risk mitigation. It was completely in all theirs, and we just launched that in January of this year. But the point I'm trying to get at here is this is how you continuously refine a custom simulation to last 15 years. You take a proven model, an agile process, and then you build on it and continually improve it from there. But now let's kind of shift gears from Cummins, a very established kind of process there, to one that's actually in progress. Because what we're actually starting to do the same thing with Merck, the German multinational pharmaceutical company. And we've been working within their global health organization for the better part of a decade as a part of their Future is Now program, which is really about kind of, again, breaking down silos, kind of teaching cross-functional decision making. And over the years, we've done on-sites in Europe, done virtually, basically all over the world. So no matter what, wherever a learner is located, they have access to the same immersive learning experience. And just like Cummins did years ago, we're now entering the next phase of that journey, where we're working with Merck to integrate new topics that reflect on their evolving business priorities. And what are we talking about specifically? Things like digital transformation, digital strategy, ensuring Merck learners are equipped to navigate the changing landscape of pharma and new technologies like AI and predictive analytics. And then secondly, sustainability concepts, enhancing our simulations to reflect Merck's long-standing environmental and corporate responsibility goals. And we're following the exact same iterative approach. Create a proven model, create a custom module to make the scenarios and decisions more relevant for Merck's needs. And I can actually very briefly show you just how easy it is for us to do that. It's very straightforward. I mean, we simply just start by reviewing what works best for the sim and where can we improve. From there, we scope things out. My team and I meet with them, talk about what kind of decisions or topics would you like to be represented. And then we build a couple of concepts out and send it their way. And then once we've agreed on the scope, we can build these things in a couple of weeks' time. And then we simply pilot them, make future adjustments for other programs. And that's exactly what we're getting started right now. But looking back now, we talked about customization in a couple different forms. With Cummins, we kind of honed in on refining the overall program design and how custom sim fits into that. And with Merck here in particular, we're kind of honing in on modifying simulation decisions. But there's one other aspect that we've yet to focus on: how a custom simulation can be delivered. And to do so, I do want to keep us within the realm of pharmaceuticals, and we're going to talk a little bit about Eli Lilly, because we've been partnering with Lilly for over 10 years now as well to help them build business acumen, in particular, financial literacy, and mainly for like their manufacturing and quality leaders. Really helping them see how certain business decisions and challenges align with the ones actually Lilly's facing as they continue to just grow at breakneck speed. And to accomplish this, we didn't refine what the leaders were learning. We kind of focused more on how we were delivering it. So, what did we do exactly? Well, we integrated a co-delivery approach where both CAPSIM and Lilly facilitators work together to connect these sim concepts directly to their business. And really the key here is collaborative debriefing. So we actually have associate directors of finance at Lilly discuss the real world challenges that are represented in the simulation. And then I have our facilitators tie those insights right back to the simulation results. Again, more of a feedback loop. For example, we might tie, our simulation to their manufacturing scorecard. It's one of their primary success measures. Or we do a comparative financial statement analysis where we're literally taking the SIMS results and putting it right up against Lilly's most recent quarterly results to reinforce that real world connection. And it makes it so they don't just learn the concepts, they know how to directly apply them, and they know why it's relevant to them at their company. And once Lilly nailed this process, and we've been doing it for quite some time now, we of course took it globally, which brings us to the final principle that we're going to talk about today, and that is scalability. Right, ensuring these high impact programs can reach learners globally without losing effectiveness and without having to reinvent the wheel every time as well. And this also represents another major challenge as the companies face. It isn't just building an effective custom simulation. It's how do I scale this across different teams, different regions, different roles without going back to the drawing board? And you think of it like a puzzle. If a piece doesn't connect, your efforts kind of stay fragmented to kind of put it all together. But when it's done right, training should work as like kind of like compounding interest on your ROI, or returning investment. You're kind of, with each improvement, it builds upon the last, basically. But again, here, really the key is you want to nail the execution first, and then you can scale it. You start with a strong foundation, and then you can expand it efficiently. So that way, what worked in one area can benefit the entire organization. And to kind of put it succinctly, here's how it's kind of done. You start by, again, refining the modular elements of the custom simulation first, like we've been talking about up to this point. And that allows it to be easily tailored for specific roles, regions, and so on in the future. And then when the time comes, then you can localize it efficiently. Translate, key elements that are based on region or language or the learner level while keeping the core learning objectives intact. And then you can expand that proven solution and then roll out these successful programs globally without, again, unnecessarily reinvention or, quite frankly, disruption as well. It's this approach that keeps the sim experience consistent. Quite frankly, it keeps it cost effective as well and impactful at scale, ensuring that what works in one area can be seamlessly applied elsewhere. So now that we're coming towards the end here, I did want to revisit some of the success stories and add a new company to the mix to kind of show you how they've scaled their custom sim programs. So to tie a bow with Diageo, they took more of an align and refine approach. They wanted to ensure that the leadership program was proven and effective before expanding it. And now here we are in year 3, and they're preparing to extend the simulation into other regions around the globe this year outside of the UK. And then secondly, we have Samsung, one we haven't mentioned yet, who, much like Lilly, wanted to focus on refining how their custom simulations could be delivered. And actually, the way that progressed was we started by doing an initial on-site pilot program at their headquarters in South Korea. And while we were there, we trained their internal facilitators to lead future sessions on their own and allowed them to scale this globally. And just in the last year or two, they've put out over a dozen internal programs that get better and better every time. And then finally, to wrap up Cummins nicely, just to kind of show you how things have progressed, over the course of this time, we had started by building those 2 scalable simulation-based sessions that are now delivered on nearly every continent, still waiting on Antarctica. We deliver them to vastly different divisions and even some former subsidiaries that have broken off with them since, while still maintaining consistency with these custom sims at every single level. So, cover a lot of ground today. Take a quick breather. And in summary, just want to go ahead and summarize what those 4 key takeaways really, drill down to when we're talking about impactful custom sims. Again, first, launch them quickly. That way you can build in weeks, implement them quickly, not in months. Secondly, make sure they measure effectively, and make sure you can prove the impact with performance data. And then after that, then you can refine them continuously. That way you can adapt to different business needs in real time. And then from there, scale that success, standardize it, and expand it across teams. Because with these combined principles, the best kind of custom simulation based programs don't just train learners, they actually adapt and they scale and they deliver that lasting impact, which we started today's session with. And to help you kind of apply what we've covered today, we're going to go ahead and provide you all with what we call an agility scorecard. It's a real simple tool that can assess how well your own L&D programs, whether they include simulations or not, align with the four key attributes we hit on: speed, adaptability, measurability, and scalability. And you can download this now. I think Gary's got it hosted there, or we'll send it to you afterwards in an email. But really, we wanted to give you something practical, something valuable, so that way you can keep these principles top of mind moving forward as well, whether you choose to connect with us or not. So as we start to close, I do hope today's session has been valuable and has given you a lot of insights into how to build these agile and scalable custom simulations. But if you are interested in learning more about how we at Capsum operate directly, we'll give you a chance in just a moment. But I did want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that we know that, from learning from our clients, that we are just a piece of the puzzle. Really what we try to be is a true partner that can work within your company's unique processes and really help create solutions with you that align with your vision, drive, impact for your firm specifically. So if you did like what you've seen today and you can see the potential, we've got you covered, because what we'd like to do is offer an accelerated way to demonstrate the benefits of these custom simulations with our Captain Launchpad, which means we can essentially set up a mini pilot for you and your team to experience these firsthand to see if it's a good fit for you. And the best part is it's entirely risk-free. You just take 30 minutes of your time, you talk with me personally, and we can get something set up. In fact, it's as easy as a simple 3-step process. All you got to do is simply use our scheduling QR code link on the next slide. You can use it with your phone to schedule a call with me here directly sometime in March. And then we'll discuss your needs, and I can ask you a few questions. And then within a week or two of that, I can personally provide you and your team with a custom sim pilot setup so you can show your colleagues firsthand and review it internally. And then from there, all I ask, we just hop on a debrief call. I want to get your thoughts. If you want to, and if you do want to move forward with it, we can always discuss how we could scale that pilot up to immediately provide that to your learners as well. Really, again, at the end of the day, just like we started, we just want to share with you all the benefits that we've seen with custom sims over the years and what our clients have seen. So again, if you'd like to take part in this offer, feel free to simply scan that QR code in the bottom left of the screen. You can schedule a call with me personally. I got my LinkedIn QR code there on the right if you'd like to connect with me that way. We will, of course, also send the slides and the agility scorecard from today's session to you all via email if you don't grab it here, and you can always connect with me that way as well. But in closing, I do want to truly thank you all for all of your time today, and honestly, everything that you've taught us over 40 years. And of course, I do want to personally thank Gary and Training Magazine for having us for today's session. This format was different for us, and I do hope that you found it valuable. And of course, at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Gary, back to you.
So, Matt, thank you so much. This has really been educational. In the past, you've done sessions like this, and so many of these questions that you've answered today have come up. So we're very glad to have had you. Also, we have a lot of new questions right here from Morella and from Steve and Eric and Elaine. So I'm going to start in with those, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Eric asked early on, and thanks everybody for holding your questions for the end and being patient with that. But we really appreciate it and want to make sure we get them all in. So anyway, Eric asks, how does one balance a quality product with a minimum viable product when it comes to the Agile process?
That's a great question. So, I mean, of course, it's all about priorities, and I think we hit on that a little bit with here, but it's really all about priorities. It's making sure you have that measurement at the start, making sure that has enough. It's enough of a high fidelity experience where they can make the direct connections, but really at the end of the day is, are you actually measuring what you're trying to assess? Are you actually getting out with it of the simulation what you're trying to achieve? And then at that point forward, you can focus more on, I hate to say bells and whistles, but kind of more of like, making it as hyper realistic as possible. So again, it goes to that proven model. kind of taking what we know works already, just trying the base model first, just to see if it's a good fit for you. And then we could do slight iterations and customization. So you go from that MVP to something phenomenal like Cummins did over time, because Rome wasn't built in a day, but we're not exactly taking a couple thousand years, right? So that's how I'd respond to that. It's a great question. Great question.
Great. And then Elaine wants to know how much of Lean Six Sigma is incorporated into Agile Sims?
Oh, quite a bit there, quite a bit. In fact, we're actually working on that with Cummins right now. There's some specific examples I could speak to you on how we exactly do that. Some of that probably came through in the latter half of the presentation, but in short, yes, we do make sure that's a key component. We want to have that methodology built in. So.
Okay, cool. Great. And Elaine, thanks a lot for the question too. Margaret is asking, are you using reports and dashboard templates that specific client uses in your simulations, or are these CAPSM templates?
Actually, we've done a little bit of both. We've done a little bit of both, not just for like what the learners themselves see in the simulation. Of course, we have our own platforms and everything like that, but we do a lot in the terms on the integration side, whether we try to mimic systems that they have that they're using. I mean, one example I could provide of that I didn't hit on today was S&P Global Market Intelligence. They have a financial analytics platform called Capital IQ, and they use Inbox to literally put their own people that work for them, their trainees and their end users, whether they're in corporate or academia, they put them in the role of a junior analyst, where they're in this environment where they're having to get questions about market analysis and things of that nature, navigate into their platform, and then pull that information from this financial intelligence platform to apply it in a real world context. So in short, yes, we can do that. But then even just from like a more of a L&D professional perspective, we can always integrate with LMSs too. That way we can port this data directly to the way you're used to seeing it as well. So.
Great, thank you. So we got about 4 minutes left here, but I can go a little bit over if we need to, maybe 5 minutes over, if we need that much to add a few more questions here. Okay, let's see. Mark Bowers is asking, what size of group or audience would be ideal for getting started and making the investment worthwhile, like a
Absolutely.
minimum investment?
Yeah, so I can share a couple things there, and I'll kind of break it into the two solution categories. So as far as like in a leadership accelerator, I would say that our most common cohort size for something like this, like something that we can get off the ground quickly, its average size is probably about 20 to 30 individuals, I would say. But I mean, I have a program coming up the first week, April, where we're doing it for 10 executive level roles, right? We've also done programs. We've done like your annual leadership summits for companies where we've had 150, 200, 300 people going through this at any given point in time. But I would say that we are fairly cost effective in that regard. So getting something off the ground is pretty easy to justify, regardless of the size of the group. Now, something like Capsum Inbox, if you're talking about building a custom sim, then you're going to want a good amount of people to go through it. And to make a quick connection there, I would say that we put a really big emphasis on not just the relevance, but predictive validity testing, right? Ensuring that not only is this thing relevant, but it's valid. And I would say that usually we want to see about 100, 200 people go through an inbox, just so the data stabilizes enough. That way we can actually get some great comparative data, actually get percentile based info and things like that, right? So kind of a different track for answering that question, but I hope that was still helpful. So.
That is helpful. Let's see. Oh, yeah, yeah. This came up. Several people were asking this. Does your platform allowing customers to build their own simulations, or must you be involved at every step?
That's an excellent question. So no, actually, we don't have to be involved at every step. Now, of course, when you're talking about like a very complex simulation, like a leadership accelerator, it is good for us to kind of, share the best of both worlds, your experience with our technical expertise to kind of build out like custom modules, like we talked about with Cummins and Merck. But as far as Inbox goes, absolutely. We've got an entirely web-based, no coding whatsoever authoring platform. And in fact, if you are interested, make sure you schedule a call me. I can give you full access to it, short of publishing. That way you can see how you could build your own Capsum Inbox simulations in as little as a couple hours time. I mean, I myself have used it to make dozens of simulations over the years. In fact, I've used it for candidate screening, where I put it, a little day in the life of Capsum on a job application and let people see what's it like to work here. Is this job right for me? Does it match the job description? Or I've seen it used for, again, as part of performance review. I've seen it used with, like we talked about with Diageo, for assessment. Or you can use it as a more kind of immersive kind of training module with kind of a coaching character that kind of breaks the fourth wall and says, hey, you approached it this way, maybe try this way. But all just food for thought. The short answer is yes, we do have abilities where you can build your own from scratch with little to no involvement from us. Yes.
So you should work with me to build one to show people how to use our takeaways question at the end. Today, we have so many people who are using it right, but we need something to train all the other people who attend webinars to do it like this group has done such a great job putting the takeaways in the right pod and the thank yous in the other pod. So we could work on that together, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. You were saying?
No, I was actually going to say, I'm sure there's more questions, but one thing I did want to ask the group to put in the chat. I mean, did this presentation meet your expectations? Did you find this valuable? I mean, do you see the benefits? And did this kind of build your understanding of simulations? Any and all of the above? I'd love to get your feedback on, because that's how we make these things better, honestly.
Good. Yeah. So put those in the regular chat right under Matt's photo there, and I'm just going to block off the takeaways so we don't accidentally put it in there. And yeah, go ahead and answer Matt's questions there. Meanwhile, I want to thank Matt again for today's session, and we'll give you also. I pulled this out earlier. The link to all of the previous Capsum webinars as well, in case some of those might be able to help you. In fact, Matt, can you think of one that might be particularly useful to this group that we've done in the past?
I would say the most recent one we did prior to this was really great, because in that one we spent most of the time going into really in depth on 5 key case studies. The title eludes me at the moment, but whatever the most recent one, this would have been around fall of last year, I believe August, Gary, if that was correct.
Great.
That was great, I would say, because we hit on things like Microsoft and other companies and how they've used our simulations too.
Scaling leadership development, how top companies find fast whatever fast track future leaders. Is that the one?
Couldn't have said it better myself, Gary. That's it.
Okay. Well, you could have said that better. I'll give everybody a link for that one. Thanks a lot for guiding us to that. So I'm just going to put that in the chat right now for everybody who's here. Okay. And for those of you who arrived a little after we started, keep in mind that you can get a transcript of everything Matt has said in the recording by just clicking the right button. If you need to know how to do that, if you missed me explaining that, let me know in the chat here in a moment, and I'll be happy to show you after we stop the recording. But I think we've covered everything. We've done all the damage we can do today, Matt. Unless you have anything else that you would like to add.
I would just close by saying again, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time, and I hope I have the chance to speak with some of you. So take it easy until then.
Well, thanks very much, Matt. Look forward to the next time we get to work together. Appreciate it. And thanks to all of our members for joining and participating, asking great questions there. We'll go ahead and turn off the recording now. But again, if I can help you out in a few moments, well, just let me know there in the chat. Okay. All right, Matt, take care.